Welcome to Persevere to Preserve the Gettysburg Battlefield National Park, the first Z Productions video to show some of the changes that have been undertaken in the park, trying to return and preserve the park in a way that will pay homage to the hallowed ground of the Battle of Gettysburg. The decision to preserve an historic battlefield must take into account many different factors, one of which is the historical significance of the battle. Therefore, a short background history of the Battle of Gettysburg to determine its significance is in order. This was one of the most important battles of the Civil War, if not the most significant. Fought over the course of 3 days in July 1st through the 3rd, 1863. After a stunning victory in Chancellorsville, Confederate General Robert E. Lee was emboldened to march his army north into Pennsylvania. He thought that if he could defeat the U.S. general, who at the time was George G. Meade, in the north, he could possibly earn the military aid of France and England and even win the war. The fate of the entire conflict rested on the fierce fighting that occurred over 3 days in July. Before the Battle of Gettysburg, it appeared that the South could not be defeated, that their generals were too good, and that their soldiers seemed to have superhuman capabilities, and that they would likely win the war, their independence, dividing and dissolving the Union. Rarely does history have such a defining moment of climax, where the war comes to a single valiant moment, a single charge, a moment where the hopes of one side are dashed and the other side are rewarded. However, Pickett's charge at the center of Meade's Union line was just such a climactic moment. After 2 days of bloody fighting, with almost 35,000 dead on both sides, the highest two-day total of the war, Lee ordered George Pickett to march 3/4 of a mile across open fields to attack the Union infantry positions dug in on Cemetery Ridge. Under the withering barrage of Union artillery, infantry, and flanking fire, 2/3 of Pickett's division were lost. It was all the rebels could do to shore up their defenses in case Meade ordered the final blow against them. After the battle, Lee retreated with his battered Army of Northern Virginia, never to return north again. Months later, after the battle, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made a few remarks to dedicate the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. These remarks of just 272 words became Lincoln's most famous speech, known to this day as the Gettysburg Address. Like everything else at Gettysburg Battleground, there is more meaning and historical significance than appears on the surface. The dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg became a restatement of what it means to be an American and what America means to the world, and added to the historical significance of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Gettysburg Battlefield has gone through many changes over the years, but recently during this century, there has been a concerted effort to reclaim the battlefield so it can be brought back and preserved as a national monument, just as it appeared back in July 1863. A few key examples demonstrate the ongoing fight to restore certain areas of the battlefield, like National Tower at Gettysburg, Lee's headquarters, Thompson House, and even the cyclorama. However, these sites have a history all their own, and they both add and detract from the battlefield. Now, let's take a look. The National Tower at Gettysburg. Abraham Lincoln is also credited with saying, "You can please some of the people all of the time, you can please all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time." This is certainly true of the National Tower of Gettysburg. From its construction, the battle has continued between the purest preservation of the battlefield and the commercialization for the sake of tourists and visitors. In 1974, when construction of the tower by real estate developer Thomas R. Ottenstein was completed, the court battles over the rights of private citizens to operate this tower and the rights of those who wanted to see the preservation of this hallowed ground were already ongoing for 2 years and continued throughout the life of the tower when it came down in 2000. There were those who believed that the tower was worth saving regardless of the ground over which it looked. One of these was Joel Rosenblatt, who engineered the tower. He believed that the unique design of this tower, along with its cutting-edge construction for the day, was worth its preservation. At 307 feet tall, the tower gave visitors who paid a fee to go up to the air-conditioned observation deck a wonderful view of Gettysburg battlefield, with information about various visible battlefield sites, as well as the town of Gettysburg itself. The tower became a flashpoint of a movement that had at its heart the goal of restoring the hallowed battlefield to its original 1863 appearance. Many believed that by restoring and preserving, visitors would have the purest experience of the site of the largest battle in the Western Hemisphere. On the other side of this conflict were those that wished to profit from the large number of tourists that come to the battlefield every year, about 2 to 3 million visitors annually. The 1974 60-minute story highlights the battle between Ottenstein, the entrepreneur who built the tower, and the governor of Pennsylvania, Milton Shapp.
Americans. It would be fair to say that Governor Milton Shapp of Pennsylvania is not amused.
Oh, I think this tower that we're looking at here just desecrates the entire Gettysburg battlefield. I would only favor and permit the construction of this 307-foot tower if first they dug a 300-foot hole and built the tower in it.
I believe in what I'm doing, and I haven't done anything wrong. The law says I can do it. The courts have said I can do it. The legislature says I can do it. Everywhere along the way, I've been proven right.
While the situation was complicated by other businesses that surrounded the park, between 1974 and 1990, the battle to remove the tower continued in the courts. However, in 1990, a federal judge ruled that the government could use eminent domain to take sight of the tower, compensating the owners with $3 million. In 2000, on the 137th anniversary of Pickett's charge, Controlled Demolition Inc. used explosives to demolish the National Tower of Gettysburg. Preservationists, reenactors, fired cannons, both Confederate and Union, to make it appear that the tower was being brought down by period cannon fire. Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg, also known as Thompson House, is another example of a structure that has a history all its own. In July 1863, this was the home of widow Mary Thompson. During the battle, General Robert E. Lee used her home as his headquarters. Even at the age of 69, Thompson remained in her home throughout the battle, even though she could see much of the bloodiest fighting of the first day. She used her home as a hospital for soldiers of both sides, caring for the wounded with some of her neighbors. The Thompson House was an obvious choice for Lee because it provided the central location and the visibility in all directions that a general would want to command his troops. In the time after the battle, the Thompson House became a tourist attraction. For the same reason it became Lee's headquarters, this site became a tourist service attraction, being along the main route with historical significance. There were cabins where tourists could stay the night, and in the 20th century, a full hotel complex with a restaurant and saloon. The acquisition of this hotel to restore the property of the Thompson House was not as combative as the tower. The owners of the hotel deeded the historical contents of the house to the Civil War Trust to go with the property. Among the artifacts was the original deed to the house purchased by radical Republican Thaddeus Stevens. The 4-acre property, including a museum and a gift shop that had operated out of the house since 1921, the 48-room Quality Inn Hotel, and the Appalachian Brew Company, a restaurant and brew pub, was purchased by the Civil War Trust for $5.5 million in 2014. To complete the historic preservation of this battlefield property as it appeared in 1863, the hotel that brought a great deal of tax revenue to the borough had to be destroyed. The house itself had to have dormers removed, and the roof had to be redone along with all the work that had to be done inside, even restoring the doghouse. This was a major effort, restoring the surrounding landscape to its original appearance. The historic property reopened in 2016 after a year and a half of work. The intention of the Civil War Trust is to donate the property to the National Park Service to be added to the Gettysburg National Park. The cyclorama. Finally, and probably the most historical of these examples, is the cyclorama. The painting is from 1884. The building that housed the painting was created by a famous architect in 1962, but while the painting lives on in a new location away from the historic part of the battlefield, the structure created by Tim Neutra was destroyed. The cyclorama is a painting where the viewer stands in the middle of a circle to get the feeling that they are standing in the middle of, well, in this case, Pickett's Charge. This one was painted by Paul Philippotteau. Originally from Boston, the Battle of Gettysburg was on display there for 20 years, then was sold to a Gettysburg entrepreneur. It was moved, restored somewhat, and remained in operation for about 40 years, when it was purchased by the National Park Service. It was moved again to the newly constructed Cyclorama Center in 1962, when Tim Neutra's modernist architecture, which was part of the Mission 66 National Park Plan. The building itself was a wonderful example of the type of modernist architecture that Neutra has become famous for. However, in the grander scheme of restoring Gettysburg National Park to the appearance of 1863, the 1962 structure was demolished in 2013. The cyclorama painting was painstakingly restored and moved to a new rustic-style Gettysburg Museum and Visitor Center, which is not in or near the historic battlefield. In closing, the three examples of creative destruction that I presented here are a prime example of the conflicts that arise and the ways that a precious national treasure like the Gettysburg battlefield are restored to their original state for future generations of Americans to enjoy. The historic value of this place is increased as the commercial interests are removed from the park. So why destroy a tower, a hotel, or an example of modernist architecture, yet keep a 12.5-ton painting? The many variables that contribute to this decision boil down to this. The buildings hinder the landscape, prohibiting visitors from appreciating the natural landscape of the battlefield. However, the painting, which is historically significant itself, was moved off location to a museum. The flow of the landscape is now an example of how a battlefield restoration is undertaken to provide a more historically accurate picture to visitors and historians alike. Thank you for watching.